I'm going to do a quick little ditty on the sound versus hearing just to make sure we understand a clear difference between electromagnetic radiation and what sound is. There's two completely different waves altogether. All right, so if you remember, sound is actually a longitudinal wave. Because when I'm talking right now, my vocal cords are squishing the sound, then they're refracting it, they're spreading it apart, and they're squishing it over and over and over. Now we tend to model this wave sometimes electronically when we look at this, as the compression is the peak here and the refraction is a trough over here. High pressure versus low pressure of the air. High pressure versus as a model. Sometimes we'll make sound into this as a model, like an oscilloscope or other ways, just because it's easier to model what's going on or describe what happens in the wave. But keep in mind, sound is every bit of a longitudinal wave. It's squishing and unsquishing the wave all the time. So because it's a wave, it behaves like any wave does. But it is a mechanical wave, meaning you have to have a medium. If you don't have a medium, you're not going to have a sound. Okay? And it travels different speeds in different mediums. So the more dense the medium, the faster it goes, like through steel. Very fast through steel. That's why old timers back hundreds of years ago, or if you're going to rob the train, you put your ear to the railroad track, being steel, and it travels much faster in steel than it does in the air. You can have a better idea if a train's coming or not. And air, because the particles are spread apart, it's not really as quite nearly as fast in the air. So we're going to talk about intensity and loudness of this and our perception of that, and of course frequency and the pitch. Let's talk about the speed first. Speed of sound is about 342. So when I say it's about, that's in typical temperature of air that we like. Temperature can influence the speed. The hotter it is, the faster the speed of sound. The colder it is, the slower. So as you go up in elevation, sure, there's less pressure, but that's not the big factor of the speed of sound. It's actually the speed of the molecules. Since you're moving slower, it takes the sound a little bit longer to slam in from the particles and the other particles. It actually slows it down. So it is 765 miles per hour, or about 1,000 meters every second. I was also going 342 meters every second in terms of miles. I'm sorry. It goes about 1,000 feet. About 1,000 feet per second. So if you hear a thunder, you see lightning, and you count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, that means it's gone about 5,000 feet, or about 1 mile. So that's one way you can do to figure out how far away the lightning is, the time it takes between the flash and the kaboom to figure out how far away that thing actually is. Okay, so it's about 1,000 feet per second. So sound speed varies depending on the medium. Travels faster in solids. We just talked about that a second ago. Slower and less dense stuff. Okay. Intensity. So this is basically the how much energy you have. It's a measure of the energy you have. It's your amplitude. Depends on the amplitude, and the further you go from the source, it dies down because it's spreading out through space. Okay. And we measure this and call it decibels, because a bell's not a very big after Alexander Graham Bell. A decibel, well, it is big, but a decibel is 1/10 of that. But that's what we use today. So really loud friggin' stuff hurts your ears, instantly painful, 120 decibels. That's bad for the hearing. 90 decibels is a little irritating. It's kind of loud, but if you like your rock and roll music, you're going to probably turn it up at least at 90 or a little more before your parents start griping at you to turn that noise down. 70 decibels really isn't all that bad inside a compact car. Moderate, you're going to find out the background radiation. This is not an average classroom that I've ever been in. 50 decibels, I've never had one that quiet before. 30 decibels, you're going to struggle to find something quieter than 30 decibels even in the suburbs. You get in the mid-city, you're not going to get down to 30 decibels, but in the suburbs, in a nice, peaceful night, you might get down to 30 decibels, like in your bedroom and so on. But the 50 decibels in the classroom, yeah, and even during the test, that's even tricky. 10 is barely audible. So this is based on hearing, what human hearing. It's not that there aren't noises there below zero, because there are below zero. We just don't hear them very well. It's based on our hearing. And it's logarithmic. This is 10 times the intensity is 0. This is 3 zeros more intense, or 1,000, because it's 3 0, 1,000 times more intense than that. That is 7 zeros more intense because this is a logarithmic scale. It doesn't seem like it's that much noisier, so it's kind of a relative term. Okay, so loudness is subjective. Okay, depends on who the person is hearing it, whether and so on, whether they like the rock and roll or not. It's personal, physical response to the intensity of sound. Intensity increases, so does the loudness, of course. The loudness depends on the listener's ears and the brain. So we'll talk about that in a second. So frequency is, of course, how often something vibrates, vibrating the air or something else. And pitch is related to that. It's the quality. The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch. The lower the frequency, the lower the pitch. So pitch depends on the frequency. We use that to describe what it's like. The frequency is the actual numerical amount, where the pitch describes what it's like. So high frequency is high pitched, low frequency, low pitched. Pitch also depends on your age and your health. Well, what happens, we're going to do a little test on your hearing a little bit. As you get older, you tend to lose the high stuff. Okay? Oh, we can do the test right now. Won't this be fun? Okay? See how old you guys are. All right, as a test of your oldness. Okay, this could get a little loud in here, so I'm going to turn on my speakers over here, and I'm going to play a note here. And, I'm not plugged in over here on my speakers, so you're not going to be able to hear that at all. I'm going to put this on your thingy, so you can click on it and check yourself and listen to the different frequencies. If you go down to 20, that's the lowest you could ever hear. And if you don't have a subwoofer, you're not going to hear it very easily. Clear up to 20,000. I'm going to lose it because I'm getting old. After near 15,000, I tend to lose this altogether. So on your own, go back and test that thing, and maybe I'll do a little test video on this with my speakers on in a little bit. All right, so let's get back to the PowerPoint over here. All right, so we'll talk about later on the difference between the highs and the lows. All right, so there's what I talked about. 20 is the lowest that we can hear. That means 20 vibrations per second. Elephants can communicate at lower than that, which we don't hear. That's infrasonic, meaning below what we can hear. 20,000 is the highest we can hear. So if it's ultrasonic, that means we can hear it. Maybe some dogs can. Infrasound sounds lower than what we can hear. Ultrasound is at higher than we can use. Technologies use this stuff all the time, like sonar. You vibrating the water and see what those vibrations come back when they bounce off the sun, to see what's underneath the water and how deep it is. Ultrasound does the same thing, but inside your body. So your body has different densities. So because your body has different densities, you get different reflections. Every time you hit a new boundary, the wave bounces back every time there's a new boundary. And so what those tissues are like depend on how they bounce back. You can see shapes inside the body to see if there could be something going on without actually opening somebody up. Okay, so of course with how we view babies, it doesn't hurt them at all. It's a very high frequency that they don't hear either. But what happens is you have different tissues here than here. You get some reflections off the different boundaries, and you get the shape of whatever's on the inside. Okay, just used a bunch. How do you hear? Well, there's your big thing that helps capture some of the vibration to make it a little more intense in here, because you got a finely tuned thing called, what's the membrane called that vibrates here? It's called the eardrum. And so it vibrates with the high pressure, then the low pressure, it pushes back out, back and forth, back and forth. That vibrates through here, that vibrates some other stuff into the cochlea. Inside the cochlea, you got some little nerve cells, hair-like things in there that actually vibrate at your different frequencies. And that sends that signal off to the optic nerve to your brain, and your brain interprets that as sound. Okay? So we got three main parts. You got your outer ear, you got your middle ear that receives and amplifies those vibrations, then you got your inner ear. This is where the nerve stuff is. And if you have nerve damage, well, today we still can't fix this stuff. So once you damage your nerves in your inner ear and you get a ringing sound all the time, that's a warning sign that you've done some damage. And after a few days, sometimes that stuff goes away, at least when you're younger. But as you're older, sometimes that never goes away. It can really drive some people crazy. So when you have nerve damage, usually because of loud sounds too often, that causes a permanent problem. Alrighty, so there's more about the ear canal. There's the vibration in it through all the little parts. I'm not going to bore you with all the little parts. You can go back and look at that on your own. But inside the nerve part of those little hairs, that's the critical part to your hearing that can be damaged due to loud noises if you don't have hearing protection. All right, so we end this thing with reproduction of sound. Where the way this is stored is we do it electronically. Okay. So we have a mechanical vibration. It's a microphone. Microphone converts that into electrical signal. You can convert that right into storage as what's called analog. That transfers the compression into a peak and the rarefaction into a trough, and how quickly that changes. It stores that in what's called an analog sense. And the other way, though, the newfangled way these days, or the last 30 years or more, is digitally. You actually take that wave, even if you put it into a transverse wave, you separate in that little bits of ones and zeros, ones and zeros, ones and zeros, ones and zeros. And that pattern of ones and zeros, you can go back and recreate that same transverse wave. That when you send that transverse wave electrically to the speaker, it vibrates the speaker and turns that back into a not transverse wave, but a longitudinal wave. Alrighty. And we're going to call that a day on that for a little quick primer on sound. So the big thing is they all travel the sound. Speed travels the same speed unless you change the medium. It can speed it up or slow it down. But now you're going to find out what some different wavelengths are, some different frequencies of your high versus your low.